Every morning, before most people arrived, the building was already awake because of him. The lights would turn on floor by floor, trash bins would be emptied, and the quiet smell of cleaning liquid would slowly fill the long halls. He moved without rush, pushing his old cart, wiping fingerprints off glass doors, sweeping corners no one else cared to notice. Most people did not know his name. To them, he was just the janitor, someone they passed without looking twice. He had learned to walk softly, not because he was shy, but because he understood his place in their eyes. When students laughed loudly in groups, they never lowered their voices when he passed. When teachers talked in the hallway, they paused only to step around him. Sometimes, someone would nod or say a quick hello, but most days he blended into the background like part of the walls. There were moments when the silence felt heavy. Not the peaceful kind, but the kind that reminds you that you are unseen. He never complained. Complaining had never helped him before. Life had taught him that some people were meant to be noticed, and others were meant to keep things running quietly behind the scenes. His work was simple but steady. Fix a loose chair, clean a spill, replace a broken light. He took pride in doing things right, even if no one noticed. The floors shined because of him. The restrooms stayed clean because of him. The building breathed easier because of his effort. Yet, no applause followed a clean hallway. Sometimes, small jokes floated his way. Not always said directly to him, but loud enough for him to hear. Comments about his uniform, his quiet nature, his age. People assumed his whole life story based on the mop in his hand. They thought he had no dreams, no talents, no past worth knowing. He never answered back. He had learned long ago that defending yourself only gives people more reason to laugh. Instead, he kept his eyes down and focused on his work. Inside, though, words stayed with him longer than he let on. They followed him through the halls, echoing quietly as he worked alone. There was one place in the building where he always slowed his steps. A room with heavy doors and soft echoes. Inside stood an old piano, slightly scratched, slightly out of tune, but still standing proudly in the corner. Whenever the door was open, music drifted into the hallway. Sometimes it was messy practice notes. Sometimes it was a simple melody played over and over again. When he heard it, something inside him shifted. His hands would pause mid-motion. His breathing would slow. For a few seconds, the noise of the world faded. He never stepped inside while others were there. He respected boundaries, both spoken and unspoken. He would simply listen from a distance, letting the sound settle deep inside his chest. Music had a strange way of waking memories he tried hard to keep quiet. He did not talk about his past. Not because it was shameful, but because it belonged to a time that felt far away. A time when life had seemed full of promise, before responsibility changed everything. During lunch breaks, while others scrolled on their phones or chatted loudly, he sat alone near the maintenance room. He ate slowly, thoughtfully. Sometimes, he tapped his fingers lightly against the table, creating small rhythms without realizing it. If someone noticed, they did not mention it. If they did, they likely thought nothing of it. The building grew louder as the day went on. Footsteps echoed. Laughter bounced off the walls. Doors slammed. He continued his work through it all, invisible but necessary. When events were held, he arrived earlier and stayed later than everyone else. Cleaning up confetti, fixing chairs, resetting the space like nothing had ever happened. On one particular day, the building buzzed more than usual. People talked excitedly about an upcoming performance. The piano room stayed busy. Music filled the air more often, spilling into the halls. Each note seemed to follow him as he worked, pulling his attention again and again. As he cleaned near the room, a group passed by, laughing. One of them noticed him standing still, listening. A joke was whispered, then another. The laughter grew. He pretended not to hear, but his shoulders stiffened slightly. He picked up his cloth and kept cleaning. Inside something stirred. Not anger, but a quiet ache. The kind that comes from being misunderstood for too long. He wondered briefly what it would feel like to be heard. Not just seen, but truly heard. Then he pushed the thought away. Dreams were heavy things to carry while pushing a mop. As the day ended, the building slowly emptied. The music stopped. The halls returned to silence. He finished his final round, turning off lights one by one. When he passed the piano room, the door was left open. The piano sat alone in the dim light. He stopped, just for a moment. His eyes rested on the keys. His fingers twitched slightly, as if remembering something old and familiar. He did not step inside. He did not touch it. He simply stood there, breathing in the quiet, letting the memory of sound live inside him. Then, like always, he turned away. No one noticed him leave. No one knew what rested behind his silence. To them, he was still just the janitor. And for now, that was enough to keep his story hidden. He woke up early again the next morning, before the sun had fully risen. The streets were quiet, and the world felt untouched. He moved through his small apartment with careful steps, making breakfast, preparing his lunch, and arranging his few belongings with quiet precision. His life was simple, predictable, and on the surface unremarkable. But there were layers beneath, hidden from the eyes of the world, full of stories that no one had asked about. The janitor had not always lived this quiet life. Years ago, he had spent hours in rooms filled with music, with the soft click of piano pedals and the echo of practiced notes bouncing off walls. He had dreamed of playing for crowds, of standing under bright lights while the audience listened to every sound he created. Music had been his language, his refuge, and his way of expressing emotions that words could never capture. But life had other plans. Family struggles had forced him to leave that dream behind. There were responsibilities that he could not ignore, bills that demanded payment, and people who relied on him more than his music. Slowly, he traded sheet music for cleaning supplies, a stage for hallways, and applause for silent acknowledgement. He never stopped loving music. He simply stored it carefully in his heart, bringing it out only in stolen moments. Now, working as a janitor in a busy building, he found tiny chances to reconnect with the art he loved. Every time he passed the piano room, he would pause, letting his eyes linger on the instrument. Sometimes he would tap a rhythm on the edge of a table, or hum softly when no one was listening. These small gestures were enough to keep the memory of his skill alive, though no one else could see it. One day, as he was polishing the floors near the piano room, a teacher left the door open. He froze for a moment, caught off guard by the faint smell of polish mixed with the lingering scent of music from the day before. Through the open door, he saw the piano waiting, its keys slightly worn but still capable of producing the sounds he remembered so vividly. He felt a pull he could not resist. For a long moment he just stood there, hands folded, eyes fixed on the instrument. Memories came rushing back. Long nights of practice, the thrill of mastering a difficult piece, the nervous excitement before a recital. All of it returned in an instant. He could almost feel the applause on his face, even though it was just a memory. He inhaled slowly and tried to calm the rush of emotions. Music was a powerful force. It could both heal and remind you of everything you had lost. He remembered a teacher who had once told him, "Talent without opportunity is like a bird in a cage. It may sing, but it will never fly." That memory brought both a smile and a sting. He had been caged by circumstance for so long, yet the music had never left him. It had lived quietly, waiting for the right moment. As he worked through the building that day, he found himself humming faintly. He tapped his fingers in rhythms that matched the songs he had once played for hours without stopping. Students passed by, some glancing curiously at the sound, others not noticing. He did not care. For the first time in a long while, the music seemed to follow him naturally, almost as if it had been a part of his life all along, despite the years of neglect. Later that afternoon, a small group of students lingered near the music room, practicing for an upcoming recital. He watched from a distance, careful not to draw attention. He noticed how their fingers stumbled over some of the simpler parts, how they struggled with timing, and he felt a quiet recognition of his own journey. He knew what it meant to learn, to fail, and to try again. There was a tenderness in his gaze, a respect for the effort they put in, even if their skill was not yet polished. One of the students, noticing him nearby, whispered something to a friend. The friend laughed quietly. He caught the words, brief and light, about the janitor never being able to play a note. It stung, though he kept his expression neutral. He continued his work, sweeping and wiping, while inside, memories of piano lessons and late-night practice ignited a quiet fire. He realized that no one could truly know what someone carried inside. Talent and passion were often hidden behind ordinary appearances. During a break, he sat down near the piano room. The keys were calling to him silently, almost urgently. He rested his hands on his knees, imagining the sound that would come if he allowed himself to play. He remembered the weight of the keys under his fingers, the way the music seemed to flow through his body. He closed his eyes and let the memory play out, feeling the sensation of music in a way that was almost tangible. The day passed slowly, each task completed with his usual quiet diligence. When the building emptied, he returned to the piano room. This time, he allowed himself to step closer. The wood was slightly cold under his palms. He touched the keys lightly, letting the memory guide him. The first note was hesitant, unsure, but it reminded him of who he once was. The sound echoed softly through the empty room, filling the space with a sense of warmth and familiarity. He played slowly at first, testing the piano, reacquainting himself with the instrument. The music flowed naturally, almost as if it had never been forgotten. His fingers moved with precision, yet there was a rawness to it that spoke of the years in between, years of longing, of missed opportunities, of quiet observation. Each note carried a piece of his story, unspoken but deeply felt. For a while he simply played, letting the music pour out, unrestricted. There was no audience, no expectation, only the piano and him. The room seemed to respond to him, each note lingering in the air, as if acknowledging his presence. He could feel the power of music not as a performance, but as a living expression of all he had been through. As the final notes faded, he rested his hands on the keys, breathing deeply. He realized that this connection, this moment of solitude with the piano, was enough for him. It reminded him that passion could never truly be erased. Life could redirect it, delay it, but it could not destroy it. The janitor left the room slowly, a small, private smile on his face. No one had seen him play, but he knew what had happened. Music had found its way back to him. From that day forward, he carried himself with a quiet confidence. Not the kind that demanded recognition, but the kind that came from knowing one's own worth and talents. He continued his work, still unnoticed by many, still judged by some. But now, inside, he held a secret power that no one could take away. The piano, the music, and the memories of what he could do gave him a strength that showed in the way he moved, the way he cleaned, and the way he lived. He understood that one day, the opportunity might come when he could share his talent with others. Until then, he would keep practicing, keeping the music alive within him. Every note he played, even in solitude, was a reminder that greatness could exist quietly, hidden behind ordinary walls, and that sometimes, those who seem invisible carry the most extraordinary gifts. The day started like any other. The janitor moved quietly through the hallways, broom in hand, trash bags swinging lightly from the side of his cart. The building was filled with the usual sounds, footsteps echoing, papers rustling, the occasional shout from a classroom. He worked steadily, as he always did, unnoticed by most, but keenly aware of everything around him. That morning, there was excitement in the air. Posters for the school's annual talent showcase were taped to every bulletin board, and students talked in clusters about their performances. Some were nervous, some were confident, but the janitor, as always, remained at a distance, observing without participating. He had watched these events before, feeling the vibrations of the music, the energy of the performances, but he had never imagined himself stepping into the spotlight. As he was pushing his cart down one hallway, he noticed a small group of students gathered near the piano room. The door was open, and he could see a few practicing their pieces. He slowed his pace, curious but careful not to interrupt. He had played in rooms like this for hours in the past, and he could recognize skill and passion from a distance. Some of the students struggled, missing notes and rushing through passages. Others moved with ease, their fingers gliding confidently over the keys. He watched, silently noting the mistakes, appreciating the effort, and remembering the countless hours he had spent perfecting his own craft. One of the students spotted him and whispered something to a friend. A snicker followed, and soon a few more students were pointing in his direction, whispering jokes. They laughed softly, thinking he couldn't hear them, but he did. He stopped for a moment, his eyes steady on the floor, but his mind was alert. He had learned long ago that laughter could sting, but it did not define him. He had endured years of being underestimated, dismissed, and ignored. This was just another small moment in a long pattern. Despite the whispers, he continued to work, sweeping the floor and wiping tables, his presence calm and composed. Yet inside, something began to stir. It was a quiet determination, a subtle fire, reminding him that the music inside him was still alive, still capable of surprising people. The piano was close. The keys called to him, and for the first time in years, he considered what it would feel like to answer that call. The students, encouraged by each other's laughter, dared him to play. One of them, a bold voice among the group, said it aloud. "Come on, show us what you can do. You look like you don't even know a note." The laughter grew louder, fueled by the audacity of the suggestion. The janitor paused, hands gripping the broom handle, and looked up. He saw faces full of curiosity, some teasing, others genuinely excited by the challenge. The moment felt surreal. This was not a place for a janitor, at least in their eyes. But he knew differently. He had lived with music in his soul for decades, waiting for a chance that had never come. He walked slowly toward the piano room, the sounds of laughter following him like echoes. The students expected hesitation, maybe even failure, but he moved with quiet confidence. Each step was measured, deliberate, and unafraid. The laughter faded slightly as he approached, replaced by a tension that even he could feel. The room seemed to hold its breath, as if sensing the shift in energy. When he reached the piano, he stopped and looked at the keys. They were familiar, worn from years of use, and yet capable of producing beauty. He placed his hands lightly on the keys, letting the first few notes find their way naturally. The sound filled the room softly at first, a simple melody that drew attention without fanfare. The students went silent, unsure of what was happening. Their whispers stopped. Their eyes widened. The janitor, who had been invisible for so long, was about to reveal a part of himself no one had expected. He began to play with more confidence, letting the music flow through him. Each note carried emotion. Years of practice, years of waiting, years of being overlooked. His fingers moved with precision and grace, creating a melody that was both familiar and extraordinary. The students listened, mesmerized. Some held their breath, afraid to move. Others leaned forward, unable to look away. The room that had been filled with laughter and teasing moments ago was now filled with sound that demanded respect. As he played, he felt a mixture of joy and release. Every note was a statement, a reminder that talent and passion cannot be hidden forever. He did not play to impress or to prove a point. He played because it was a part of him, a truth he could no longer keep locked away. The music spoke for him, telling a story that words could never convey. It was a story of resilience, of quiet strength, and of beauty waiting to be seen. The students were stunned. Faces that had been full of mockery were now filled with awe. Some whispered apologies to themselves, realizing how wrong they had been. Others simply listened, unable to find words to describe what they were hearing. The janitor continued, completely absorbed, moving through the piece with a depth of feeling that transcended the room. Each chord, each subtle variation in tempo, held the power to change perceptions. When the final notes lingered in the air and the last chord faded, there was a moment of silence. It was heavy with realization, with a recognition that something remarkable had just occurred. The janitor's hands rested on the keys, calm, steady, and unshaken. He looked up at the students, meeting their eyes for the first time fully. They had seen him, truly seen him, in a way they never had before. Then, slowly, the room erupted in quiet applause, hesitant at first, then louder. The students moved closer, some smiling with newfound respect, others simply shaking their heads in disbelief. The janitor remained composed, acknowledging their reaction with a small nod. He had not sought their approval, but he accepted it with grace. In that moment, the invisible man became visible, not just to the students, but to the entire building. From that day forward, things began to change. Whispers of his talent spread quietly among the staff and students. People began to look at him differently, not as just a janitor, but as someone with extraordinary ability. He continued his work, still quiet, still humble, but there was a new light in his eyes, a subtle confidence that had not been there before. The laughter and mockery that had once followed him no longer held the same power. He knew that this moment, while small in the grand scheme of the world, was a turning point. It was proof that passion and talent cannot be hidden forever, that those who seem ordinary may carry extraordinary gifts, and that respect is earned not by appearances, but by the courage to reveal one's true self. And though he returned to his cleaning duties after that day, the memory of the music, the sound of the piano, and the stunned faces of the students stayed with him, a quiet reminder that life has a way of surprising those who wait patiently for their moment. The janitor sat at the piano, letting his hands rest lightly on the keys as he took a deep breath. The room was quiet, filled with the stunned faces of students and staff who had gathered unexpectedly to see what would happen next. The laughter and teasing from earlier had vanished completely, replaced by an expectant silence. It was as if the room itself had shifted, waiting for something extraordinary to unfold. He closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the familiar weight of the piano under his fingers. Memories of countless hours spent practicing, of small recitals and private performances, returned vividly. Each note he remembered, each melody he had cherished, flowed into his mind as naturally as breathing. This was not a performance for anyone else. It was a release, a way to reconnect with the part of himself that had been silent for too long. The first note rang out soft and deliberate. It held a certain warmth, a sense of calm that immediately captured the attention of everyone present. The janitor's fingers moved with confidence, each key producing sound with a clarity that seemed almost impossible given the age of the piano. The music began slowly, simple at first, but layered with emotion. It was clear that he had a deep understanding of rhythm, tone, and timing. Each note was precise, yet it carried a raw, human feeling that no technical skill alone could create. As he continued, the music became more complex. His fingers danced across the keys with a combination of strength and delicacy, creating melodies that intertwined in ways that surprised even those who had doubted him. The room seemed to shrink around the sound, the air itself vibrating with the intensity of the music. People held their breath, mesmerized by the unexpected display of talent. The students who had mocked him earlier were frozen in place, unable to comprehend the beauty that was pouring out before them. He did not rush. Every note was intentional, every chord carefully chosen to convey emotion. He played pieces that spoke of hope, struggle, and triumph. There were moments of quiet reflection, passages that felt like a gentle conversation, followed by powerful crescendos that echoed the depth of his experience. It was as though he was telling a story without words, and everyone listening could feel every chapter unfold. Some students instinctively reached for their phones to record the moment, but they soon realized that no recording could capture the essence of what was happening. The janitor's performance was more than skill. It was soul, carried decades of experience, emotion, and quiet resilience. Even the teachers, who had seen countless students perform, were speechless. They watched, unable to look away, their respect growing with each note. The room seemed to respond to him. The faint creak of the piano bench, the subtle echo of the keys in the large space, and the stillness of the audience all combined to create an atmosphere that was almost sacred. For a moment, the janitor was not just a man who cleaned floors. He was a messenger, conveying something powerful and universal. He played not for recognition, not for applause, but because it was a part of him that could no longer be contained. Minutes passed, though it felt like hours. He moved seamlessly from one section of the piece to another, each transition smooth, almost effortless. The music swelled, filling every corner of the room with emotion. It was as if the walls themselves were listening, absorbing the sound, and reflecting it back with resonance. The students who had doubted him could only stare, their previous judgments falling away, replaced by awe and admiration. One of the younger students, eyes wide, whispered to a friend, "I didn't know he could play like that." The friend nodded, equally astonished. They had spent months seeing him push his cart, sweep floors, and clean windows, never imagining that such talent lay hidden behind his quiet demeanor. The realization was humbling. It reminded them that appearances could be deceiving, and that the quietest people often carried the most extraordinary gifts. As the final section approached, the janitor allowed the music to build to a climax. His hands moved faster, more confidently, creating a cascade of notes that seemed to ripple through the air. The sound was powerful, yet controlled, a perfect balance of intensity and grace. When the last note finally lingered and faded, there was a moment of absolute silence. It was a silence filled with recognition, with respect, and with the understanding that something rare and beautiful had just occurred. Then the room erupted into applause. It started softly, hesitantly, then grew louder and more enthusiastic. Students clapped, some shouting words of praise, while teachers joined in, their faces showing surprise and admiration. The janitor remained seated, calm and composed, acknowledging the appreciation with a small nod. He did not smile broadly or seek attention. The music itself was the reward. But inside, he felt a quiet satisfaction, a recognition that he had shared something deeply personal and profoundly moving. After the applause settled, a few students approached him hesitantly, unsure of how to express what they felt. One whispered, "I'm sorry we laughed earlier. That was wrong of us." Another simply shook his hand, eyes filled with newfound respect. The janitor nodded, accepting their words without judgment. He understood that people often speak without understanding, and that moments like this could change perceptions more than any argument ever could. From that day on, his presence in the building changed. People began to see him differently, not just as the janitor, but as someone with remarkable talent and depth. Students greeted him with smiles, and teachers acknowledged his contributions with a newfound respect. Yet, he continued his work quietly, humbly, performing his duties with the same dedication as always. The difference was in the awareness of his own value, the knowledge that he had shared a part of himself that could never be ignored again. The piano remained in the room, a silent witness to the transformation. The janitor continued to play when the opportunity arose, each time reinforcing the truth that passion and talent cannot remain hidden forever. He had been mocked, underestimated, and overlooked, but through his music, he had revealed a side of himself that could not be ignored. The building itself seemed to hold a new energy, as if acknowledging the change that had taken place within its walls. In the weeks that followed, whispers of his talent spread quietly, touching the hearts of those who heard about it. People began to approach him, curious about the music, asking questions about his experience and his journey. He shared selectively, speaking of music as a lifelong companion, a source of solace and strength. He never boasted, never sought fame, but allowed his story to unfold naturally through the sound of the piano and the reactions of those who listened. Through it all, the janitor remained grounded. He knew that life had brought him to this moment not by accident, but through years of perseverance, patience, and quiet dedication. The music had always been a part of him, waiting for the right time to emerge. Now that it had, he embraced it fully, understanding that true talent does not require validation from others to exist. It only requires the courage to express itself when the moment arrives. The building, once a place of routine and indifference, had become a stage for transformation. The janitor, once invisible, had demonstrated the extraordinary power of hidden talent, showing that greatness could emerge from the most unexpected places. And as he returned to his daily tasks, the echoes of his music lingered in the halls, a lasting reminder that even the quietest among us can create moments that leave the world stunned and inspired. After the remarkable performance at the piano, life in the building began to shift in subtle ways. People who had once passed him without a second glance now paused to greet him. Students who had whispered jokes behind his back approached him with curiosity, some asking quietly about his music, others simply smiling with newfound respect. Teachers, too, began to see him in a different light, realizing that the man who had kept their building running smoothly was not only reliable but extraordinary in ways they had never imagined. He continued his daily work as he always had. Floors were swept, trash was collected, restrooms were cleaned, and classrooms were set in order. His tasks did not change, but his presence carried a quiet authority that was impossible to ignore. He moved with the same humility as before, but now people noticed his dedication. It was not just his skill at the piano that commanded respect, but the way he approached every part of his life with care and attention. Word of his talent spread beyond the immediate building. Students who had been present during the performance shared their experience with friends and family. Teachers mentioned it in passing to colleagues at other schools. Soon, a small but genuine buzz began to build around the janitor, the man who had stunned everyone with his unexpected gift. Yet, he remained modest, never seeking attention or recognition. The music itself was reward enough. Some students began to watch him more closely, not out of mockery but out of admiration. They saw the way he moved, the precision with which he handled his tasks, and the quiet joy that seemed to radiate from him when he played the piano. He had become an example, a reminder that talent and passion can exist in the most unlikely places, and that judging someone by appearances can lead to missed opportunities for understanding and appreciation. One day, a small group of students approached him and asked if he could teach them some basics on the piano. They wanted to learn, not for a performance, but to understand the joy he found in music. He agreed, carefully guiding them through simple notes and rhythms. His patience was remarkable, and his teaching style was gentle yet firm. Each student discovered not only the mechanics of playing the piano but also the emotional depth that music could bring. Lessons that began as curiosity became moments of inspiration, creating a bond between the janitor and the students that transcended titles and roles. His influence extended beyond the classroom. Teachers began to ask for advice on handling challenges with students, not knowing that the janitor's wisdom came not from formal education but from a lifetime of observation, patience, and perseverance. He offered guidance quietly, never asserting superiority, but his words carried weight. People began to understand that someone who had been overlooked for so long could have insight and experience that few others possessed. The piano remained a central part of his life. Whenever he had a quiet moment, he would sit and play, allowing the music to flow freely. Sometimes, small groups of students or staff would gather silently to listen, not interrupting, simply absorbing the beauty of the performance. His music became a source of calm and inspiration, a reminder that even in the midst of busy routines, there is space for something profound and human. Occasionally, invitations arrived from outside the building. Local music clubs, small community gatherings, and nearby schools had heard about the janitor's talent and asked him to perform. He considered these invitations carefully. He did not seek fame, but he realized that sharing his gift could inspire others in ways that went beyond personal satisfaction. Slowly, selectively, he began to accept some invitations, bringing his music to audiences who would never have expected such brilliance from someone who had spent years quietly tending to a building. The respect he earned was not just for his musical ability, but for the integrity and humility he had shown throughout his life. People saw that he had never complained, never demanded recognition, and had always focused on doing his work well. His quiet courage had transformed the way others viewed him, and in turn, the way they viewed themselves. They learned that kindness, dedication, and hidden talent are powerful forces, capable of challenging assumptions and creating meaningful change. Over time, he became more than a janitor. He was a mentor, a musician, and a symbol of resilience. Students who had once laughed now approached him with admiration, some seeking advice, others simply wishing to share a moment of conversation. His story, though not widely known, spread slowly, inspiring people to look beyond appearances and appreciate the value in every individual. He continued to live his life with the same quiet dedication that had defined him for years. His work remained important to him, but now it was intertwined with the knowledge that he had made a lasting impact on those around him. The music, the lessons, and the moments of connection had transformed both him and the people who witnessed his talent. He had shown that greatness can exist in unexpected places, and that patience, persistence, and authenticity can lead to remarkable opportunities. In the end, the janitor's life was richer not because of fame or recognition, but because he had embraced his passion fully, sharing it in ways that touched others deeply. He had turned mockery into admiration, invisibility into presence, and quiet skill into an unforgettable demonstration of human potential. The building continued to function smoothly, as it always had, but now it held a deeper meaning. Within its walls, people learned that every person carries hidden stories, and sometimes, the most ordinary seeming individuals can produce moments that leave everyone stunned and inspired.